Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Merci, mes chers amis. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui. What a pleasure to see so many people out this afternoon for this conversation I'm going to have with Pat about how we respond to both the challenges in the world we're facing right now and the opportunities that they will create. As we see disruption, as we see transformation of so much in our communities, in our economy, in our world, we also know, especially business people here, know that with those challenges and disruption come tremendous opportunities to succeed, to lead, to grow. And I'm very much looking forward to having a conversation about that and other things. I want to thank Pat, but also all of you for inviting me here for this opportunity. I want to thank Anne as well for her leadership at the board, and also for the kind things she said about the work we've been doing over the past years. And you know, there's been a lot of conversations around diversity and inclusion and reconciliation, and the kinds of things that we know are good and valuable and moral and important to do. And that's something that always matters to Canadians. But we have to remember that even as we are doing nice things, they have to be smart things. We can't just govern or transform an economy because we feel it would be a good values-based thing to do. Including women in the workforce, creating a child care program across the country is about making sure we have greater female participation in the workforce and therefore greater opportunities for growth, for jobs, for prosperity. Making sure everyone of different backgrounds has reduced barriers to participate to the fullest of their potential in succeeding in our economy, in our country, is something we simply have to do because at 40 million people, we are competing with the largest economies in the world. Making sure we're stepping up on reconciliation is about rebuilding bonds of trust that have been broken over centuries because of colonialism. That means that now we are actually in a better position to get natural resource projects approved, to create equity partnerships with people who've lived and stewarded this land from time immemorial. That doing the right thing also is the smart thing to do. And that's why, as many people rightly focused on the initiatives that have been including and deepening the diversity of this country, that's also how we've reduced child poverty from 15% to 10% over the past years, how we've created millions of jobs over the past years, despite pandemics, despite global downturns, how we continue to make sure that Canada is competitive around the world, drawing in global investment from every corner of the planet to a greater degree per capita than any other G20 country. There's a lot going on in sort of cultural attacks on people doing, thoughtful, moral, value-based choices, which is starting to overlook the fact that those choices are not just the right things to do, but they're the smart things to do. They're what ensure stable, resilient communities that can handle the transformations the world is coming at and the opportunities that I know we can all seize. And as we've come through some really big challenges over the past years, we're now seeing very clear signs that the Canadian economy is coming out stronger than most and incredibly well positioned to take on with confidence and ambition the great challenges of the coming years and decades. I can talk about numbers, the fact that the IMF has Canada projected to grow faster than any other G7 economy next year, including the United States. The fact that we are looking at the highest level of foreign direct investment of any country in the G20 per capita, and in absolute terms, the third largest in the world. That means companies around the world are interested in investing in Canada are interested in the solutions we're offering, in the natural resources we have, in the innovation we're doing, but mostly they're interested in Canadians themselves. Hardworking, well-educated, ambitious, living in strong, vibrant communities, optimistic about the future, even at a time where everything is difficult. Those are numbers that we can be very confident about. But of course, an economy isn't about numbers. Economy is also about people. And Canadians continue to face real challenges. Cost of living, significant pressures on groceries and gas, anxiety about where their jobs are going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now with the advent of more and more automation, AI, shifting worlds of work, shifting priorities, shifting global supply chains, disruption of global conflicts, creating instability, whether it's Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, driving up grocery prices and food prices all around the world. This is a very, very complicated time to live in, and Canadians are feeling the brunt of that. Pour des décennies, on a sous-investi, différents gouvernements de tous différents partis, dans le logement. Successive governments of multiple different stripes underinvested in housing, particularly in low-income or affordable housing. That has left us in a really difficult situation where young people particularly we have to tackle. We know that that sense of concern has people anxious about the future. Has people worried about where their success is going to come. And that dichotomy, that balance between saying, okay, we have one of the strongest economic positions in the G7 right now. The macro, in terms of Canada's advantages and opportunities, are tremendous. Our deficit is the lowest in the G7. Our debt to GDP ratio, the debt we carry as the size of our economy, is not only lowest, it's also decreasing every single year. And the international bond rating agencies continue to mark Canada as a AAA solid bet for investment, which is part of why companies and countries from around the world are interested in what we're doing. So we have a really great economy on the highest levels, but Canadians are hurting. So as a government, what choice have we made? We said, okay, let's put the strongest fiscal situation in the G7 in service directly of Canadians who need it. And that's a choice we made a number of years ago, and not just because it's, again, a nice thing to do, which it is. It's also because it's the smart thing to do. When the pandemic hit, and I know nobody likes to think about the pandemic anymore, when the pandemic hit, Canadians made a very clear decision to be there for each other. And our government stepped up with support for individuals and support for businesses with the wage subsidy. It was among the strongest in the world. And because of that, our economy bounced back faster than just about any other economy in the world. And we had a far less deadly pandemic than anywhere else, than many other places in the world, because Canadians were there for each other and because we got vaccinated to a higher degree than most of our peer countries. So investing in supporting people in tough times is actually how you ensure a stronger future. But over the past few years, the challenges we were facing was we needed to bring down inflation. Because inflation being too high and the interest rate hikes that came with it leave, as you all know, people hurting and businesses really squeezed. So we had to bring down inflation while at the same time being there for people. So what we did is we delivered on a few different big programs that took massive amounts of money, massive amount of costs out of the pockets and bank balances of Canadians. Bringing childcare down, cut in half across the country, $10 a day in many, many places, as we expanded access to spaces. Well, that meant thousands of dollars a month saved by families with childcare age kids. That came at exactly the right moment as interest rates were rising and people were squeezed on their mortgages. We stepped up with the Canadian Dental Program. It has already delivered dental care to 1 million people, most of them seniors in the first wave, some of whom hadn't gone to the dentist in decades, that they could suddenly now do this. We stepped up and are stepping up with this National School Food Program. It's ensuring close to 500,000 kids in the coming years across the country will not just have better access to school food so they don't have growling bellies while they're in a classroom, and as a teacher I remember that. But as a parent I also know the scramble to try and put together nutritious lunches for kids as we send them off in the morning, and knowing that there is going to be good food available to kids supports parents, but also saves them about $800 a year for a family of 2 across the country in groceries. These are initiatives we put forward that weren't affecting the decrease of inflation, and we're showing up for people in really tangible ways. Ambitious housing plans, over $4 billion put directly in the pockets of municipalities to change the way housing is built. I mean, the federal government could buy a bucket load of nails and some 2x4s and start actually building housing, and in some places we do that. But if we wanted to change the way housing is built across the country, it's municipalities that lead on that. So we stepped up with the Housing Accelerator Fund that put billions of dollars out across the country to increase densification, to accelerate permitting and remove red tape, to use public lands to make sure that housing was being built near transit stops. These are the things that are actually getting us towards the 4 million new homes that need to be built in the coming years across the country. These are the kinds of things we've stepped up with that are actually making an impact. But there's more to do as well. The Canada Carbon Rebate delivers here in Nova Scotia $824 a year to a family of 4, which is more. Right across the country, the Canada Carbon Rebate, which is very effective in fighting climate change, also puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 families, and especially helps lower income families. It's a way of fighting climate change and putting money in people's pockets. The HST holiday for the next 2 months is going to be helping Canadians, it starts on Saturday, it's going to be helping Canadians be able to afford all groceries, toys for Christmas, school clothes, restaurants. These kinds of things matter, particularly for small businesses at a time where January and February we know are slow months. And it sends that message that people can start being optimistic again about where our economy is going and their ability to not just survive but thrive as things start to pick up once again. We're also making a big bet on the future of this country by drawing in more foreign direct investment, by putting forward ambitious plans on EVs that include tires built here in Bridgeport, include hydrogen, include things like AI, include Canadian leadership in critical minerals to replace the Chinese supply chains that the world is so sometimes precariously reliant on. This is all part of the vision of how Canada can succeed and lead in the coming years. But democracy is filled with choices. And this coming year, as you all know, because you just went through an election here, I had a great chat with Tim this morning about all the things that we're going to be doing together. There's a lot of alignment with Premier Houston on the economic file of what we're going to be building together over the coming months and years. But as we approach a federal election, let me tell you one thing. Every program, every initiative that I just talked about as being there to invest in Canadians, to create things from childcare to school foods to dental programs, to draw in investments for battery plants and tire plants and critical minerals, to deliver a tax break for Canadians for the next few months, every single one of those, Conservative Party of Canada and Pierre Poilievre voted against and stood against. So right now I understand that people are frustrated with where their lives are, about how they feel, about where they're going, about how expensive everything is. But the one thing we get to do in a democracy is reflect on what kind of future we want, what kind of world we're going to leave to our kids, what kind of opportunities we're going to create for our kids next year. Et cette réflexion-là sur dans quel genre de pays on veut vivre et quel genre d'avenir on veut bâtir pour nos enfants, c'est la question fondamentale qui doit se poser dans les élections. And right now we're seeing clear tendencies around the world of easy answers without any solutions, of politics of division and polarization and anger, versus thoughtful solutions that involve rolling up our sleeves and getting the work done. Well, I spent a lot of time here in Nova Scotia over the course of my life, particularly the past number of years. And I know what Nova Scotians do when you're faced with times of challenge, times of crisis, when you're facing one of those big storms, or a turn in the local economy. You throw up your hands and give up? Do you complain that everything's terrible and broken? That's not what Nova Scotians have done for generations and centuries. You roll up your sleeves. You lean together. You say, we can fix this. We can get through this. We've done it before. We've done it again. That's what Canadians are. That's who we are as a nation. That's what the world needs us to be. And that, my friends, is the challenge we have to give ourselves every single day as we look to the future and find our ability to have confidence, ambition, and optimism about it once again. That's what we're all here together for. Merci beaucoup, mes amis. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. I think we've got an hour and a half questions that we need to get through in less than 30 minutes. Quick questions and snappy answers. Let's see how it goes. I'm going to jump right into probably one of the most critical items, which are tariffs. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has released alarming new figures on the potential economic fallout of the proposed tariffs on U.S. imports, and that was before those threatened tariffs were mentioned at 25%. I guess what is being done by the Canadian government and you yourself personally to ensure that Canadian-U.S. trade relations remain healthy, and that if tariffs are imposed, how can we adapt?
Well, first of all, let's not kid ourselves any way, shape, or form. 25% tariffs on everything going to the United States would be devastating for the Canadian economy. It would require us to pull together and support each other and hang in there to prevent just horrific losses in all of our communities for everyone. They would also, however, mean real hardship for Americans as well. Americans import 65% of their crude oil from Canada, significant amounts of electricity, just about all the natural gas exported from Canada goes to the United States. They rely on us for steel and aluminum. They rely on us for a range of agricultural imports. All of those things would get more expensive. Now, For years, Americans have been paying more for their homes than they should because of unjust tariffs on softwood lumber. Maybe this level of tariffs will actually have them realize that this is something they are doing to themselves. And President-elect Trump got elected on a commitment to make life better and more affordable for Americans. And I think people south of the border are beginning to wake up to the reality that tariffs on everything from Canada would make life a lot more expensive for Americans. So that's part of the argument. The other part is we will, of course, as we did 8 years ago, respond to unfair tariffs in a number of ways. And we're still looking at the right ways to respond. But our responses to the unfair steel and aluminum tariffs were what ended up lifting those tariffs last time. It wasn't that Americans were paying more for their steel and aluminum, although that was annoying to some people in the States. It was the fact that we put tariffs on bourbon and Harley-Davidsons and playing cards and Heinz ketchup and cherries and a number of other things that were very carefully targeted because they were politically impactful to the president's party and colleagues, was how we were able to punch back in a way that was actually felt by Americans. But we know a few things about Donald Trump. First of all, we know that when he says these things, he means them. But at the same time, we also know that his approach will often be to challenge people, to destabilize a negotiating partner, to offer uncertainty and even sometimes a bit of chaos into the well-established hallways of democracies and institutions. And one of the most important things for us to do is not to freak out, not to panic. Now, knowing that, yes, these would be absolutely devastating means we have to take them seriously, but it does mean we have to be thoughtful and strategic. Not go around making our opponent's arguments for him, but making our arguments in a significant and united way. One of the strongest voices last time around Team Canada was actually Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan. Now, he was, as you guys know, federal politics, no big fan of mine. We've worked together on a number of good issues together. But he and I have some really big disagreements on issues of energy, environment, and other things. But his voice with governors down south, his making the case for Canadian workers and Canadian trade in a way that complemented the arguments that we were making, did a better job of showing what Canadian unity was and Canada's negotiating position could be to a United States that has a political system that is incredibly fractured and fractious, even with the strong mandate that President-elect Trump has. There are so many diverging interests in the United States that when we can pull together and be thoughtful and strategic and firm in our approach, as we succeeded in last time, this time is going to be different. It's going to be a little more challenging. They're coming in with a lot clearer set of ideas of what they want to do right away than they had last time. But we can do this. We can do this because when crises happen, when we are challenged as a country, we step up. We've shown it on the battlefields of Europe through 2 world wars. We've showed it through international engagement and diplomacy around the world. We showed it by negotiating win-win trade deals with more economies around the world than just about any other country. We did that over the past number of years. We're now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. We do it because we pull together and we look for the win-win. We are looking for a win-win with the United States where American businesses and citizens will do well and Canadian businesses and citizens will do well. And getting that together is something that we can and will do. But as you say, Pat, it is something we absolutely need to take seriously and be laser focused on, which is exactly where we are.
Great. Jumping to the new GST holiday, or potentially GST holiday, I guess, which, as you mentioned,
out here.
HST out here,
15% off for
will start on Saturday. Although I think everyone is generally happy that there is going to be a reduction on some of the HST out here, there is some cost to local businesses. Is there anything that can be done to aid smaller local businesses with the unplanned costs of this change?
Well, first of all, I have heard from Canadians across the country who have been very pleased with this measure, because it shows that we're seeing that, yes, people are squeezed, and even with all the different programs and supports, something tangible like a tax break for the next 2 months, when people are standing in grocery stores, looking at their account balance, looking at what's in their baskets and saying, okay, maybe we're gonna have to wait a few days, or we'll have to get more of this when we come back. We're gonna do without this week. When every penny matters, this is going to make a real difference at the end of this year and beginning of next year. For retailers, particularly for restaurants, I know people know this is going to bring a lot more people out for family gatherings a little more regularly, and that's a great thing. And I know a lot of restaurants in particular are pushing this. Grocery stores already have different classifications. If you're buying prepared food, if you're buying a rotisserie chicken, for example, or whatever, there's GST on those. Right now, all groceries, as of Saturday, will have no GST. And prepared food around the holidays, that's going to make a difference for a whole bunch of people. Now, retailers, I know, will have to recode some of these initiatives, and that's can be a bit of a hassle depending on the level of size and of IT systems that you have. CRA has extensive help support and lines and information that can help people through that. But I know we're already seeing that there are so many retailers taking advantage of this to publicize it, to draw in more customers at a time where things are slow, particularly in January and into February, that this is going to be something that will hopefully also boost people's confidence and have the sense of, okay, it's okay to be out there and spending on yourself and your kids again, because we've been through the worst of the inflation and interest rates crisis, and we can be optimistic about how Canada is going to be doing in the coming years. And that's a powerful side effect of giving everyone a break.
I'm going to jump around a fair amount here. Sure. So Premier Houston may not have mentioned this morning that in his campaign, he did link the federal Liberal Party to the provincial Liberal Party and then to the carbon tax. So I'm just wondering, given that the Liberal Party didn't do very well in Nova Scotia in the most recent election, what does that tell you about the current voter thinking about the carbon tax?
It says a lot about the disconnect between what people perceive of as good policy versus what they perceive of as good politics. There are lots of things out there that seem very, very popular to do politically, and people are falling over themselves to try and do them. And we only need to look south of the border to know that very popular policy is sometimes not very good policy. We know, I mean, we're here for some of the extreme weather events, whether it's fires or more intense hurricanes that you've had over the past few years. We know that there is an absolute unavoidable cost around climate change, around the impacts of extreme weather events, on the shifts in our global ecosystems that are going to come and make everything harder for everyone over the coming decades. We know that reducing our emissions is an essential part of making sure that future generations only face the kind of extreme weather events we're living now, not things that are 5 times or 10 times worse than what we live now. That's the future we're looking at right now. But every time we talk about fighting climate change, people say, oh, this is something that's going to make a difference a decade from now or 2 decades from now, and I can't pay for groceries right now. I'm worried about paying my rent right now. I'm worried about my kids' future now and next week, not 20 years from now. It'd be nice if we could do things for 20 years from now, but I need help right now. That's not a new way of thinking. That didn't get invented in the last provincial election. That's been at the core of the challenge of fighting climate change for decades. It's why we signed on to Kyoto and missed the Kyoto targets. Actually taking action on reducing emissions and fighting climate change is hard. So we looked at all the best science, all the top economists around the world who said the best way to reduce emissions is to put a price on the emissions, on the pollution, and that will encourage people to innovate, to think of ways that work for them to reduce their emissions, to create new business models, to be competitive against your neighbors who are continuing to pollute when you clean up, even if it costs you a little more to clean up, because it levels the playing field. A price on pollution is the best way and most efficient way, market-based way to fight climate change. But we said, okay, that's half of it. The other half of it is, even if the most efficient way of fighting climate change is to collect a price on pollution and put it back in the pockets of, put it into innovation and investment and competitive industries to boost that, we didn't do that. We said, we're going to take that price on pollution and we're going to return it to ordinary citizens. Now, you may say, well, what's the point of a price on pollution if you're just going to give it back to people? Well, if everyone gets, here in Nova Scotia, about $824 a year from the Canada Carbon Rebate, that's the average price. Now, if you have 3 big mansions with an indoor swimming pool, that $824 a year isn't going to cover that price on pollution. You're choosing to pollute more than we're giving you back for. But if you're a middle-class family, and if you're living in rural areas, we give a 20% top-up because we know you have to drive further to go to school, to drop your school or work. We're giving you that money back. And if you make a decision that reduces the amount of fuel you have to buy, you get a heat pump, for example, where there's a great program to get heat pumps that we're doing across Atlantic Canada, you actually keep more of that $800 that we're sending you because the carbon price will only cost you $700 or $600 or $500 a year. So it's a way of fighting climate change that puts money back in the pockets of people who are on the front lines doing that fighting, ordinary families. That's the policy. And it just took me 4 minutes to explain it to all of you. And in politics these days, we don't have 4 minutes nearly often enough. We're not having real conversations around politics now. We're having 7-second TikTok videos. We're having a bumper sticker or a flag that's waving when I'm around. That's political discourse and debate. Of course, it's easy to say, tax is bad. Sorry, I don't know why I sounded like Frankenstein when I was doing that, but okay. Fire bad. But having conversations about how we actually solve the challenges we're facing in this world in thoughtful ways, how we reduce our emissions and support hardworking families, that's a more complex answer than my opponents actually want you to have, want you to actually reflect on. And I remain confident that if Canadians really understand that there is a clear choice to be made about the kind of country we want to live in, do we bring everything we're doing to fight climate change to a screeching halt? Because that's what's on offer from the Conservatives. No plan to fight climate change. I wonder how many people will actually choose that. Because right now, however unpopular it may seem, our price on pollution is part of the most successful plan to fight climate change that is bending the curve on our emissions faster than any of our peer countries. And we're a significant oil and gas producer and will continue to be for a number of years as the world continues to rely on it, but it's allowing us to innovate, to invest in hydrogen, in more nuclear, in small nuclear modular reactors, in renewables, in wind, in offshore wind, in the kinds of things that we know the world is going to be using 100 years from now. We know that. 100 years from now, we'll all be on renewables or on some magic form of fusion that has been invented. Right now, we're not there yet. The question is, do we get to lead on our way there and reap the benefits of leading on that? Or do we get dragged along, kicking and screaming by the folks who are focused on maximizing profits for the old way of doing things while they can, and leaving the mess to be cleaned up by somebody else? That's not the way Canadians think about their future. That's not the ambition we need for the country. So that was the answer on the carbon tax.
Okay. Yeah. Federal government's recently made significant cuts to the number of permanent residents and international students. Halifax is a university economy. There's a lot of students. There's a lot of universities. Can Ottawa consider allowing additional international students in Halifax? For some universities, this is now creating a structural deficit. And I know universities aren't necessarily a federal problem, but is there a way to help the universities a little more by allowing some additional international students?
The situation we are in on immigration traces back to the pandemic. For 2 years during the pandemic, our borders were closed. And with that came, as we bounced back in our economy, a shortage, a labor shortage that everyone felt across the country. You couldn't find workers to work in our factories, our fish plants, our restaurants. So, business community, provinces, everyone said to the federal government, we need many more temporary foreign workers to get our economy back rolling. It's been precarious through the pandemic. We need this. And we did that. We boosted the number of temporary foreign workers massively. And international students increased massively as well across the country. The problem was, once that got going, it was great, but it started to create other pressures. Rents here in Halifax started to shoot up because those international students didn't have enough residences provided for them by the universities. And the problem was a challenge here. It was much more of a problem in Ontario, where there was a systemic exploitation of international students in the university equivalent of puppy mills, where kids were committing suicide. People would sell their farm back home to send their kid to Canada to get a good education, and they'd come here and it would be complete frauds. And the provinces weren't doing their work on making sure that these kids were going to properly accredited institutions, and nobody was making sure that there was proper lodging for these kids. And they ended up just scattering through communities, driving up the rent for everyone. So we had to say, okay, we're going to put a pause on immigration over the next couple of years to allow our economy, our home building programs that are going, to catch up, so that we can get back on the track we were on before the pandemic, which we get back on with 2027. This pause gets us back to the linear, steady increases that we projected before the pandemic. But it allows our economy to catch up. It allows universities to build residences for their international students. And it allows our economies and the services and the opportunities to be there to bring in international students, to bring in high-skilled and in some cases low-skilled international workers to do the jobs that Canadians can't or won't do, but to do it in a way that is sustainable, in a way that will make sure that one of Canada's greatest advantages in the world is protected, and that is the fact that Canadians remain, even as the world is turning away, Canadians remain positive around immigration, because we know it creates growth, it creates opportunity, it's created this country in so many different ways, but it has to be done right and responsibly, and that's exactly what we're doing.
We're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask you a couple of easy, quick questions.
Okay. Yes or no answer.
Defense.
Yes.
Seems to be a source of frustration to our neighbors south of the border. And although there have been a number of announcements on defense spending in the last while, the Parliamentary Budget Office says this will meet 1.58% of GDP by 2030. Is there a way to accelerate our spending to get to 2% to satisfy NATO and perhaps other folks?
Show of hands. Who believes Conservatives spend more on defense than Liberals? Okay. Who believes Liberals spend more on defense than Conservatives? Okay.
Who knows?
Who believes Conservatives spend more than... Okay. When we took office, I mean, it's almost in the DNA of the public posture of parties. People think, oh, if you want to talk security and defense, yeah, you got to go a little more right-wing on that, because it's the right wing that invests in military and police and security issues. Well, that's baloney. Stephen Harper, in order to balance the budget, cut thousands of border officers, cut funding from RCMP, cut 9 veteran service offices, as you guys remember, across the country, so he could balance his budget. It was the equivalent of, selling off your furniture to pay the mortgage that month, right? It might work for 1 month, but it doesn't actually hold. When we took office, our spending on the military as a proportion of our GDP was below 1%, going further from the 2% target that NATO was expecting. So we turned that around. We actually properly invested in the Irving shipyards to actually deliver on that naval strategy that is so important, not just for here, but for the country. We have doubled defense spending in our plans in the first years we got elected with a defense spending plan. And then we're now in a position of tripling our defense spending by 2030. We will reach 2% by 2032, according to NATO's numbers, because the world is more complex, more challenging, and yes, more dangerous. And Canada particularly has to do a better job of stepping up to protect the Arctic. And we are doing it. I have laid out a plan to do it. It includes submarines. Yes, I know Halifax is pitching to maintain those submarines once we buy them. But we have a plan in place on it. You know who doesn't want to talk about defense spending? Pierre Poilievre. He doesn't have any plan. He hasn't committed to reach 2% anytime soon, not certainly by 2032. And in a parenthesis on national security and taking those things seriously, you should all wonder, why is it that Pierre Poilievre, who made such a big deal about foreign interference last year, talked about it every single day, and the threats to Canada and threats to democracy, won't even take a top secret briefing from our intelligence agencies on threats to his own party. He has refused to get the security clearance necessary to be briefed up by CSIS on foreign interference threats to Canada and to our democracy. Even the separatist, Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, accepted to take Canada's security clearance and briefing. But Pierre Poilievre won't. Why? Because he would rather play politics with national security than actually get briefed up on the facts of real threats that Canada is facing. So don't talk to me about, not you, but in general, don't talk to me about conservatives and defense spending or conservatives and national security. They're just not showing any responsible leadership. They're playing politics. They're very good at it. You can just look at the polls and see that that's working. But will it hold? Will it hold until the moment where Canadians actually get to make a choice about the kind of country we are and the kind of solutions we're going to put forward for Canadians in the coming years? That's what we're all going to be watching over the next 12 months or 10 months.
That was one quick question.
That was one quick question, yes. Practically a yes or no answer.
Canada Post. Our friends from Canada Post were downstairs.
We're out of time. So.
Should the federal government be intervening, as recently did in ports and those kinds of things? For many small businesses, Canada Post is essential infrastructure.
Yeah. It's small businesses, especially in more rural or remote parts of the country, and there are so many of them. Canada Post is absolutely an essential part of business success. It's a service that Canadians need and rely on. We chose to do something very differently around labor and unions and workers than the previous Conservative government. First thing we did was get rid of the bills 525 and 377 that were a tax directly on labor. And we have, in every possible case, pushed things to be resolved at the bargaining table. And there have been some really challenging labor disruptions over the past years, and we've pushed almost every single one of them back to the bargaining table to be able to be resolved. I continue to believe that the best solution is going to come at the bargaining table, but everyone at Canada Post, and the minister is meeting with both sides regularly, needs to know this is hurting Canadians, this is hurting small businesses and people right across the country, and it is endangering the long-term viability of Canada Post as a service that Canadians rely on. Because if we go through a complete Christmas season and everyone figures out alternatives to it, even if we're bringing out donkeys, to, whatever solutions people are trying to figure out, if you break trust in an institution, it's really hard to rebuild it. So we are putting all the pressure we possibly can, and will continue to, on Canada Post to resolve this with its workers as quickly as possible.
Appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before I say goodbye, I think, and thank some of our sponsors?
Well, thank you for your attention today. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. I hope some of the things I said actually, pierce through the haze of challenging situations everyone's in. Canadians are fundamentally thoughtful about the kind of future we want, the kind of solutions we're going to put forward to improve our communities, to improve our neighborhoods, to build a better set of opportunities for our kids. And every election is about that as we approach what will be an election year next year. And my only request for everyone is to be really thoughtful and go into the choices you make with eyes wide open. I think there's a number of folks in different countries, and I won't point out any particular one, where folks are going to be wondering about the choice they may be made in elections. Let's not be that kind of country in Canada. Let's be deliberate about the choices we make. If we want to stop fighting climate change, if we want to re-legalize assault-style weapons, if we want to put back into question women's rights, if we want to scrap $10 a day childcare across the country and stop delivering free dental care to vulnerable seniors, then in a democracy, that's a choice people can make. Get rid of the CBC too. That's a choice people can make. But let's take on the responsibility as electors, as thoughtful agents of change in our communities, to be smart about, no matter how much we want change, let's not fall into an easy trap of voting for change for the worse. Canadians deserve better, and I know they're going to pick it. Merci tout le monde.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister. I'm just going to say thank you very much to you, to our audience, to our advocate partner, Everwin Fuels, to our host partner, the Nova Scotia Association of Realtors. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. We hope you have a great week. And on behalf of the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, I wish you all a happy holiday. And thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your cell phone so we can continue this discussion.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Appreciate it. Thank you. It was great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.